In the quiet morning of 1969, the air at the Daytona International Speedway felt different. NASCAR officials were gathered in a small room, staring at timing sheets in stunned silence. The numbers staring back at them seemed impossible, mathematically offensive. A car had just qualified for the Daytona 500 at over 190 miles per hour. On a track where 170 was considered the absolute limit of human bravery, this car was operating in another dimension. It didn't look like a car, it looked like a weapon. It had a fiberglass nose cone protruding 2 feet from the front and a massive rear wing that stood taller than the driver's head. To the casual observer, it looked like a backyard mechanic had welded airplane scrap onto a muscle car. But to the engineers at Chrysler, it was the ultimate realization of physics applied to asphalt. To understand why this car, the Dodge Daytona, and its brother, the Plymouth Superbird, came to exist, you have to look back at the brutal landscape of the American automotive industry in the late 60s. This was the era of the Big Three: Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. Their battlefield wasn't just the showrooms of Detroit, it was the high-banked oval tracks of the South. The mantra was simple: win on Sunday, sell on Monday. If a Ford Galaxy crossed the finish line first on Sunday, thousands of Americans would walk into a Ford dealership on Monday morning to buy one. It was a high-stakes, multi-million-dollar business strategy where sheet metal and horsepower were the primary currencies. By 1967, Chrysler was in trouble. Their pride and joy, the Dodge Charger, was a masterpiece of styling, but it was a disaster in the wind. At the same time, the superspeedways like Daytona and the newly built Talladega were pushing speeds to a breaking point. At these velocities, the air is no longer just a gas. It acts like a liquid, thick and resistant. Chrysler had the power. Their legendary 426 Hemi engine was a monster, producing upwards of 600 horsepower in race trim. But all that power was being wasted. The Charger's recessed grille acted like a giant parachute, catching the air and creating a wall of resistance. Worse, the fastback roofline created lift at the rear. At 180 miles per hour, the back of the car would actually begin to float, leaving the driver with almost no steering control. Ford had already figured this out with their Torino Talladega, a car with a smoothed-out front end that sliced through the air. Chrysler was tired of losing. In late 1968, their Special Vehicles Group was given a desperate mission: create a car that could beat the wind. They had 6 months. The engineers headed to the Lockheed Wind Tunnel in Georgia. They realized that at 200 miles per hour, style means nothing. Only the shape matters. They scrapped the beautiful hidden headlights and the recessed grille. In their place, they mounted a long, pointed nose cone. This didn't just reduce drag, it pierced the air and directed it smoothly around the body. But the nose created a new problem. With the front end pinned down, the rear of the car became even more unstable. The solution was the iconic wing. It wasn't just a spoiler, it was a high-mounted horizontal stabilizer. The engineers realized that to get effective downforce, the wing had to sit in clean air, the undisturbed airflow above the turbulence coming off the roof. They calculated the height at precisely 23 inches. People laughed. They called it a towel rack. They called it a picnic table. But the mockery stopped when the car hit the track. In September 1969, the Dodge Daytona became the first stock car in history to officially break the 200-mile-per-hour barrier. It didn't just win, it dominated. it changed the very definition of what a race car could be. As the 1969 season drew to a close, Dodge had the glory, but their sister brand, Plymouth, was feeling left behind. Plymouth's biggest star, the legendary Richard Petty, the King, had actually left Plymouth for Ford because he saw the writing on the wall. Without an Aero car, you couldn't win. To win back the King, Plymouth knew they needed their own warrior. For the 1970 season, they unleashed the Plymouth Superbird. While it looked similar to the Daytona, it was a more refined beast. Based on the Roadrunner chassis, it featured a re-engineered nose and a slightly different wing angle. Most importantly, it featured a smoothed-out rear window plug that fixed the aerodynamic turbulence of the standard body. It worked. Richard Petty returned to the Chrysler family, and the Superbird became a cultural icon. However, the success of the Aero Warriors was their undoing. NASCAR was, and still is, a stock car series. To compete, manufacturers had to build a certain number of these cars for the public. For the Daytona, the requirement was 500 units. For the Superbird, it was one for every 2 dealerships, roughly 1,900 cars. These were not easy cars to sell. Imagine a suburban father in 1970 trying to park a car with a 2-foot nose cone and a wing that wouldn't fit in his garage. Many Superbirds sat on dealer lots for years, some even having their wings and noses removed just so they could be sold as regular roadrunners. They were too radical for the street, but on the track, they were untouchable. NASCAR's founder, Bill France Sr., watched the 1970 season with growing concern. The Aero Warriors were turning the sport into a one-brand parade. More importantly, he was terrified of the speeds. Tires and safety equipment of the era weren't designed for 200 miles per hour. If a tire blew at those speeds, the car wouldn't just crash, it would disintegrate. He knew he had to act. For the 1971 season, NASCAR issued a devastating rule change. If you wanted to run a car with aerodynamic appendages, a wing and a nose, you were limited to a 305 cubic inch engine. If you wanted to run the big Hemi engine, you had to lose the wing. It was a mathematical execution. A small engine couldn't push the heavy aero body fast enough, and a big engine without the wing made the car undrivable at high speeds. Just like that, the Aero Warriors were rendered obsolete. They had flown too close to the sun. The program was scrapped, and the cars were retired to museums or dusty garages. Chrysler couldn't justify the cost of building thousands of specialized cars just to have them banned by a rulebook. The era of the winged warriors had lasted barely 2 seasons, but it left a mark on the sport that would never be erased. The irony of the story is that the very features that made the cars a failure in the showrooms are what make them the most valuable muscle cars in the world today. Those weird, unsold Superbirds that dealers couldn't give away in 1970 now command prices upwards of $1 million at auction. The wing that people mocked is now the most recognizable silhouette in automotive history. They represent a brief, shining moment when engineers were given total freedom to chase speed without compromise. They weren't just cars, they were the physical manifestation of Detroit's ambition. Today, when we look back at the Daytona and the Superbird, we aren't just looking at old race cars. We are looking at the peak of the muscle car era, a time when the only thing that mattered was being the fastest thing on the asphalt. They were banned because they were too good. They were silenced because they were too loud. And in the world of racing, there is no greater legacy than being so fast that they had to change the rules just to stop you. The Aero Warriors remain the ultimate reminder that while you can clip a bird's wings, you can never take away the fact that it once flew higher than anyone else.